SingleDad was helping an injured woman until the guards came and bowed to her. The rain had just stopped when Daniel pulled over to the side of the narrow country road. His pickup truck hissed as it came to a halt, steam rising faintly from the hood, where the engine had worked overtime through the flooded gravel path. The windshield wipers slowed, then paused. He leaned forward, squinting through the leftover mist clinging to the glass. "Dad, did you see that?" asked his 8-year-old son from the passenger seat. His face was pressed to the window breath, fogging it up. "There's someone there." Daniel followed his son's gaze. Just off the road, near a cluster of soggy bushes, a figure lay crumpled, half on the shoulder, half in the mud. At first, Daniel thought it was maybe a traveler who'd slipped or passed out. But something about the stillness was wrong. He didn't think. He threw the truck in park. "Stay in the car," he said firmly, to Max grabbing his jacket from the back seat. "But no arguments. Lock the doors, just in case." Max nodded, watching with wide eyes as his dad stepped into the damp gray evening. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and pine. Daniel's boots squelched in the mud as he hurried over to the figure. As he drew closer, his heart began to pound harder. It was a woman. Her clothes were soaked through. What looked like a light cream dress was now muddied and torn at the hem. Her hair, dark and tangled, clung to her pale face. There was a small cut on her temple, dried blood tracing a line down to her cheek. She was unconscious but breathing. Daniel crouched down. "Ma'am," he asked gently, "can you hear me?" No response. He tapped her shoulder. "Hey, it's okay. I'm not gonna hurt you." She stirred, slightly, lips parting in a faint sound. But it wasn't a name or a word, just a breath, shivering. He took off his jacket and wrapped it around her, then slid one arm under her back and another under her knees. She was lighter than he expected. As he lifted her, her head lolled against his chest, her wet hair soaking into his shirt. She smelled faintly of roses beneath the rain and mud. Max was staring from the truck when Daniel returned, holding the woman in his arms. "She's hurt," Daniel said as he opened the passenger door and gently laid her across the bench seat. "Slide over to the back, buddy." Max scrambled into the back seat without question, his eyes locked on the stranger as Daniel covered her with a spare flannel blanket. "Who is she?" Max whispered. Daniel shook his head, glancing at the woman's face, elegant features under the grime lips slightly parted like she'd been running before she collapsed. "I don't know," he said, "but she needs help." He started the truck again, tires kicking up gravel as they pulled back onto the road. And in the side mirror, just for a second, Daniel thought he saw a shadow move in the trees, like someone had been watching. But when he looked again, there was nothing. Only the forest. Only silence. Only the first quiet breath of a story just beginning. The old farmhouse Daniel and Max lived in wasn't much: 2 bedrooms, creaky floors, and a kitchen that smelled faintly of cinnamon from years of baking. But it was warm, safe, and home. Daniel carried the woman straight into the guest room, gently laying her on the narrow bed with his faded quilt. Max hovered in the doorway, clutching his stuffed dragon. "Is she okay?" he asked, voice barely a whisper. Daniel gave a tight nod. "I think so. She's breathing, but we'll need to keep an eye on her tonight." He didn't want to bring her to the hospital just yet. Something about the situation didn't feel normal, and she hadn't looked like someone who wanted to be found. Once Max was tucked into bed, Daniel returned to the guest room with a basin of warm water and a towel. The woman was still unconscious. Her brow furrowed like she was dreaming something troubled. He carefully cleaned the dirt from her face, revealing high cheekbones, a small scar just below her jawline, and soft lips that twitched as if trying to form a word. When he checked her pockets for ID, he found nothing. No wallet, no phone, no bag, just a damp scrap of lace at the edge of her torn dress and a strange faint scent of gardenia. She stirred as he wrung out the towel, eyes fluttering. A soft gasp, her eyes open, startled, bright and sharp. "Hey," Daniel said gently. "You're safe. I found you by the road. You were hurt." She bolted upright, eyes wide. Where am I?" "You're in my house," he said calmly. "You were unconscious. My name's Daniel." This is my son's room, but you're welcome to rest here. She blinked rapidly, struggling to sit up. Two need to go. You can't walk in your condition. You've got a cut on your head. You were barely conscious when I found you. I'm fine, she insisted, but her hands trembled as she tried to push off the covers. Daniel sighed and handed her a glass of water. At least tell me your name, she hesitated. Seconds passed. My name is Anna, she said finally, voice uncertain. Daniel didn't press. Something about the pause told him it wasn't the whole truth. Maybe not even her real name. Well, Anna, he said, watching her carefully, I think you need some rest. There's soup in the kitchen when you're ready. She met his gaze. There was something behind her eyes, fear maybe, or something even deeper. Guilt, thank you, she murmured, for helping me. Daniel gave a short nod. Get some sleep. As he turned to leave, her voice stopped him. You didn't call anyone, did you? Like the police? He hesitated. That wasn't the kind of question most injured people asked. No, he said slowly. Should I have? Her jaw tightened. No, I just... Thank you again. Daniel closed the door softly behind him, frowning. She didn't remember much, or so she claimed, but something told him she remembered more than she wanted to admit. And someone somewhere might already be looking for her. The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains of the guest room, catching dust motes in the air and casting a golden glow over the small space. Daniel stood in the kitchen, flipping pancakes one-handed, while Max colored at the table. He kept glancing down the hallway. She hadn't come out yet. Dad, Max asked, crayon hovering over a picture of a dragon. Is the lady still sick? Daniel nodded. She's resting. Let's let her sleep a little longer. But just as he spoke, the guest room door creaked open. She stepped out slowly. Anna, wearing one of Daniel's oversized flannel shirts and a pair of old sweatpants he'd left folded at the foot of her bed. She looked less fragile in the daylight, though the bruise on her temple was still visible, and there was a guarded tightness in her posture. Max waved. Hi, want pancakes? She blinked at the boy, then offered a tired but warm smile. Sure, thank you, Daniel motioned to the table. You hungry? It's nothing fancy, but Max says my pancakes are famous. They're the best in the world, Max added proudly. Anna slid into the seat opposite him, murmuring, smells better than anything I've had in a long time. Daniel served her a plate, watching her subtly as she ate. She was clearly hungry, but she didn't eat like someone who was used to fending for herself. Her manners were refined, her movements precise, even in borrowed clothes. Another small detail that didn't quite fit her story. When Max ran outside to check on his mud fort, Daniel finally said it. I don't know what's going on with you, Anna, but I can tell you're not just some lost hitchhiker. She froze for halfway to her mouth. I'm not asking questions, Daniel added, but if you need a safe place to lay low, this house is quiet, off-grid. Not many people drive through here unless they're lost. She swallowed hard. Her voice came low. Why would you offer that to me? Daniel leaned back in his chair. Because my kid once had a 103-degree fever in the middle of a snowstorm, and a stranger in a beat-up truck drove us 10 miles to the nearest ER without asking for anything in return. She looked down the corner of her mouth, twitching into something close to a smile. He continued, You've got no idea. You flinch at every sound. You didn't want me calling anyone. But I saw how scared you were when you woke up. I may not know the whole story, but I know what it looks like when someone's running from something. She set her fork down gently. I'm not a criminal, if that's what you're thinking. I didn't say you were. She looked at him, then really looked at him. Why are you helping me? Because the world's short on decent people, Daniel said, and because Max likes you. Her eyes softened. He doesn't even know me. Kids are better judges of character than most adults. He trusts you. Silence settled between them like an understanding. Finally, she nodded. Okay, I'll stay. Just a few days, until I figure out my next move. Daniel nodded once, then it settled. For now, the safe house had a new guest. And though neither of them would admit it yet, both felt something they hadn't in a long time. Relief. By the third day, something had shifted. She wasn't just a guest anymore. She started helping. It began with breakfast. Daniel had just set the coffee to brew when she walked into the kitchen, hair tied back, sleeves rolled. She reached quietly for a dish towel and began drying the plates he'd washed without a word. "You don't have to," Daniel said, voice light. "I want to," she replied. "It feels good, normal." And it was normal in the most unexpected, peaceful way. They cooked together simple meals, eggs and toast pasta, with too much garlic soup made from whatever was left in the fridge. She chopped vegetables beside him while Max told wild stories about dragons and volcanoes. She listened with real interest, nodding and laughing. And her laugh, it was soft at first, unsure, like she hadn't used it in a while. But soon it filled the kitchen like sunlight through the curtains. Daniel noticed the change. Her posture relaxed. The haunted look in her eyes began to ease. She no longer jumped at the sound of a truck passing outside. She started wearing her hair down, and once Daniel caught her humming to herself while stirring the soup. One afternoon, while Max napped on the couch with his toy robot, Daniel found her sitting at the porch steps, sipping tea and watching the trees sway in the wind. He brought his mug and sat beside her. "You seem lighter today," he said. She smiled at the horizon. "I've forgotten what it felt like to be still, to be somewhere people don't want anything from me." Daniel looked at her. "Not even your name." She glanced at him, thoughtful. "Anna, it's not my real name, but I like how it sounds here." He nodded, letting that be enough. "I know I can't stay forever," she said quietly. "I know," he answered. They sat in silence again, the kind that didn't need filling. The wind carried the smell of pine and something like peace. "I never thought I'd laugh again," she whispered. Daniel didn't say anything. He just looked at her, and in his gaze was the kind of honesty no one had shown her in years. No questions, no pressure, just simple meals and honest talk. It was close to midnight when Daniel awoke to the soft murmur of a voice. At first he thought it was Max talking in his sleep again. But the sound wasn't coming from the child's room. It was coming from the front porch. He got up quietly, pulled on a hoodie, and walked down the hall barefoot, voiding the creaky floorboards out of habit. Through the thin screen door, he saw her. Anna sitting on the edge of the porch swing foam pressed tightly to her ear. Her body was tense. The quiet calm she'd worn the past few days had vanished. Her voice was low and urgent, barely above a whisper. "No, I told you not to call. It's not safe." A pause. "I don't care what the press is saying. They'll forget. Just give me time." Another pause, her shoulders slumped slightly. "No, I haven't. I can't tell him. He doesn't know who I am." Daniel froze, who she was. She turned slightly, her silhouette outlined by the porch light. Her free hand trembled. "I'm fine. Really. Just tell them to stop looking. Please." Then silence. She ended the call and sat there for a moment, the phone clutched tightly in her hand like it might burn her. Her head bowed. Daniel waited a beat, then knocked gently on the screen. She jumped. "Oh, Daniel, I didn't think you were awake. I couldn't sleep," he said softly. "You okay?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Just old ghosts. Nothing for you to worry about." He studied her, the way her eyes darted away, the stiffness in her jaw. "Anna, I don't need to know everything," he said, "but I do need to know, are you in danger?" She opened her mouth as if to answer, then closed it. "No," she said after a moment. "Not here. You and Max are safe." But the way her hand still shook around the phone said otherwise. And Daniel knew, whatever she was running from, it wasn't finished with her yet, not even close. The rain had come and gone, leaving the late afternoon bathed in a golden hue. Inside the modest living room, crayons were scattered across the coffee table like wildflowers, and Max lay on his belly, humming softly as he colored. Anna sat beside him, legs tucked under her, watching with quiet interest. "Who's that?" she asked, leaning closer to the paper. He was drawing a castle, simple crooked, and standing in front of it was a woman in a long dress holding a little boy's hand. "That's you," Max said as if it were obvious. You're picking me up from dragon school. Anna blinked her breath, catching softly in her throat. Dragon school, huh? Yeah, he grinned. It's far. But you came anyway. There was a pause. Then she whispered, not looking at him. Why me, Max? He looked up, his eyes honest and unguarded in that way only children could be. Because you always come back. Daniel had been leaning in the doorway unnoticed. He wasn't trying to eavesdrop, he just couldn't move. He watched as Anna gently tucked a strand of Max's hair behind his ear, her fingers pausing just a little too long. Not with hesitation, it was something else, something tender. I didn't think I was the kind of person kids liked, she said quietly, half to herself. Max didn't answer. He just scooted closer, his shoulder brushing hers. Daniel finally stepped forward, a voice low. He doesn't attach to people easily. Anna looked up at him. I know, she said. That's why I haven't left. Their eyes met, not intense, just honest. Something had shifted, too soft to name, but too steady to ignore. For the first time in a long while, Daniel didn't feel like he was carrying the weight of two people alone. And Anna, who once claimed she had no past and didn't want a future, was starting to find both one drawing and one heartbeat at a time. The kettle was just starting to whistle when the knock came. Daniel opened the door to find Sheriff Langley standing there, boots dusty, hat in hand. His expression was neutral, but his eyes scanned the small cabin quickly, too quickly. Afternoon, Daniel, the sheriff said. Daniel nodded. Sheriff. Langley got straight to the point. We got word about someone, possibly injured, fitting a certain description. Folks say a woman's been seen limping near the edge of town. You seen anyone unusual? Daniel didn't blink. No, sir. Just me and Max, same as always. The sheriff studied him, then glanced inside. For a second, Daniel thought he might push past the threshold. But instead, Langley sighed and put his hat back on. If you do see anything or anyone, you'll let us know. Daniel gave a tight smile. Of course. When the sheriff walked away, Daniel closed the door slowly, heart pounding. Behind him, Anna stood near the hallway, still and silent. He's gone, Daniel said quietly. She didn't move. You lied. I protected, he corrected gently. There's a difference. Anna looked at him, truly looked at him, for the first time since she'd arrived. And for the first time, she believed she might actually be safe. Daniel was pouring coffee the next morning when Anna limped into the kitchen. She wore the oversized hoodie he'd lent her, sleeves rolled up over her thin wrists. But it wasn't the hoodie that caught his eye, it was the watch. It peeked out for just a moment beneath the cuff. Slim, elegant. Not flashy, but expensive in a way only the truly wealthy understood. Platinum band, sapphire crown. Daniel blinked. That watch didn't belong to someone sleeping in old sneakers with torn laces. Later, as she sat on the porch sipping tea, he crouched by the steps to tie Max's leash. His gaze drifted down her shoes, worn and mismatched, didn't match the quiet grace in her posture or the way she held her cup like it was bone china. She caught him watching. What? He shrugged, just thinking. About what? He hesitated, then said softly, you don't walk like someone who's run from nowhere. A flicker of something passed through her eyes. Fear, sadness. Maybe I didn't run, she said. Daniel met her gaze. But you're definitely hiding. Anna looked away, but this time she didn't deny it. It started with a book on the shelf. Anna was scanning titles while waiting for tea to steep, when she noticed a thick leather-bound volume, American Constitutional Law. The corners were worn, the spine-cracked pages filled with margin notes in sharp, tidy handwriting. You studied law, she asked quietly. Daniel looked up from the sink, surprised. Used to. She ran her fingers over the book's edge. What happened? He wiped his hands, thought for a second, then walked over and leaned against the doorway. Max's mom got sick. Fast. Stage 4. No time to fight, barely. Time to say goodbye. I was in my second year. Dropped out a week after the funeral. Anna turned to him, her voice soft. No one helped. He shook his head. There were offers, family, church, but raising Max, it didn't feel like something to hand off. I chose him, and I do it again. There was no bitterness in his tone, just quiet conviction. Anna studied him for a long moment. You were going to be a lawyer. Now you fix fences and drive an old truck. Daniel smiled, small but real. Turns out being present for your kid teaches you more about justice than case law ever did. Anna didn't say anything, but she sat down in the chair across from him and didn't get up for a while. The thunder rolled softly outside as Anna slept on the worn couch, a blanket draped over her shoulders. Daniel had gone to bed early. Max was curled at her feet. The house was quiet, but inside her mind, memories stirred. She stood at the top of a grand marble staircase, breath caught in her throat. A glittering ballroom opened below, hundreds of people in gowns and tuxedos swirling beneath chandeliers like stars. Cameras flashed. A string quartet played softly, but she couldn't hear the music over the pounding in her ears. At the far end of the ballroom, a man in a white suit raised a glass. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Her heart raced. Then running, barefoot through a hallway lined with mirrors. Someone called her name, but it wasn't hers anymore. Not the one she wanted to keep. She ducked into a back stairwell, pulling up her dress as she fled. The sound of her breathing echoed off the stone. She ran past servants who looked away out through a service entrance where the world was wet and cold and real. Her eyes opened with a start. The ceiling fan hummed gently. Max stirred at her feet. Anna sat up, pressing her hand to her chest. She didn't remember everything, but she remembered enough to know she had run from a life of silk diamonds and something that felt like a pito, and she wasn't ready to go back. Anna stood by the door just after sunrise, her borrowed coat wrapped tight around her. Her bag, Daniel's old duffel, was half-zipped, stuffed hastily with folded clothes and the small first aid kit he gave her. She didn't hear Daniel step into the room until his voice broke the silence. Running won't help, not this time. She turned startled. I'm not running, she lied. He didn't push, just leaned against the wall. Arms crossed, watching her like a man who knew the shape of fear because he'd lived with it too long. You think if you leave now, you're protecting us, he said. I get it. I've done the same thing, pushed people away to keep them safe, but Anna. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You're safe here. With me. With Max. Whatever you're afraid of, we'll face it together. Her eyes shimmered. You don't even know who I am. I know who you've been since the day I found you on that road. Kind, brave, honest even when you're scared. He smiled gently. That's more than enough. Anna's fingers gripped the handle of the bag, and then she let it go. The kitchen was filled with the gentle scent of garlic butter and something sweet Anna wouldn't name just yet. The sun was setting outside, casting gold light across the countertops. Max sat at the table, swinging his legs and trying very hard not to peek. I'm not supposed to look right, he asked, grinning. Nope, Anna said over her shoulder. Chef's rules. She wore Daniel's old apron tied loosely around her waist. Her sleeves were rolled up and there was flour on her cheek. Daniel stood by the sink, letting her take the lead, though he couldn't help sneaking glances at her. Her focus, her laughter, the way she hummed softly under her breath, like someone who for a moment had forgotten to be afraid. It was Max's 7th birthday. He hadn't asked for anything big, just dinner at home. And when Anna had offered to cook, his eyes lit up like she'd promised him a castle. I hope you like spaghetti, she said, placing the steaming bowl in front of him with a dramatic flourish. Max gasped, it smells amazing. Anna sat across from him, smiling nervously. There's cake too. It's not very pretty, but it's chocolate. Daniel raised an eyebrow. That's the best kind. They ate, they laughed. Max told stories from school, and Daniel shared a memory of his own 7th birthday when all he got was a baseball that wasn't even new. And it was still the best day of his life. Anna didn't say much. She just watched them, listening, eyes soft. After dinner, when Max was in the living room drawing with his new markers, Daniel turned to her as she wiped the counters. Thank you, he said. She shrugged, but she was smiling. Fully this time, the kind of smile that reaches the eyes and lingers even after it fades. It was nothing. But they both knew that wasn't true. For her, it was everything. The night had settled deep and still around the cabin, broken only by the rhythmic sound of crickets beyond the window. A single lamp glowed in the corner of the room, casting a soft halo over the worn couch where Anna sat, her left sleeve pushed up, revealing the healing wound beneath. Daniel knelt beside her first aid kit open on the coffee table. His hands were rough from years of construction work, but they moved with surprising care, gentle, precise, steady. Anna winced as he cleaned the cut. "Sorry," he murmured. "It's okay," she said quietly. "I've had worse." He looked up at her for a moment. Her eyes weren't defensive like they had been when she first arrived. "Just tired, worn, real. You shouldn't have to be used to pain," he said. She gave a half smile, faint but sincere. "Neither should you." He chuckled softly, taping the new gauze in place. "Touch." The silence returned, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was filled with something warm and unspoken. Daniel's hand lingered just a moment longer than necessary on her arm. He wasn't trying to hold her, just steady her, remind her she wasn't alone. Anna glanced down at his hand, then back at him. "Why are you so kind to me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Daniel hesitated, then met her gaze. "Because kindness saved me once too. And because you look like someone who hasn't had enough of it." Something in her broke open at that, just a crack. But it was enough. "Thank you," she whispered. Daniel gave a small nod, then stood collecting the supplies. But her arms stayed warm where his fingers had been. And for the first time in a long time, Anna felt like maybe she didn't have to run tomorrow. The morning was quiet, too quiet for Daniel's liking. The sun had barely lifted over the pines when he stepped out onto the porch with a cup of coffee in hand. The cool mountain air brushed against his skin, but something made him pause before taking a sip. Across the gravel road just beyond the bend, a black car sat idle, not moving, not idling, just there. Its windows were tinted too dark to see inside, and its sleek frame looked out of place on their dusty back road. No plates on the front, no dust on the tires. New, clean, watching. Daniel's gut tightened. He stared at it for a long minute, waiting to see movement, a door open, anything. But the car remained still, a shadow that didn't belong. Behind him, he heard the faint creak of the floorboards. Anna. She must have felt it too, the change in the air. He didn't look back. He simply said low and firm, "Stay inside." The bell above the diner door jingled, a soft, familiar sound that usually meant neighbors coming in for coffee and pie. But this time something was different. Daniel was wiping down the counter, half watching Anna laugh gently with Lily in the booth by the window. For a few days, life had felt normal, like nothing waited beyond the hills. Then they walked in. 3 men, suits too sharp, shoes too polished. They didn't fit here, not in this dusty, forgotten town where flannel and jeans were the uniform. Daniel straightened slowly, cloth clenched in one hand. The men's eyes scanned the room. Cold, controlled. Then they saw her. Anna froze mid-laugh. They approached in silence. And then to Daniel's shock, all 3 men dropped their heads and bowed. Not a nod, not a greeting. A full, respectful bow, deep and rehearsed. "Your Highness," the tallest one said, his voice quiet, reverent. Daniel's world stopped. He didn't breathe. Couldn't. He looked at Anna. No, not Anna. Not just the lost woman he'd found bleeding on the road. Her shoulders had straightened. Her face was calm, regal. Still, she looked afraid. "I told you not to come here," she said softly. The lead guard lifted his head. "We've been searching for you since the wedding day. The queen is gravely ill. She asked for you." Daniel's heart pounded. Wedding queen. He couldn't move. Lily looked between them, confused. "Daddy?" "Why are they bowing?" Daniel didn't answer. He was still staring at Anna, the woman he'd bandaged, protected, laughed with. The woman who had just become a stranger in the space of a single word. "Your Highness." Daniel sat in silence long after the men had left. Lily had been taken home by their neighbor, Mrs. Laney, at Anano Elena's gentle request. The diner was closed. The lights were low, and she stood by the window, her reflection blurred by the glass. I never meant for you to find out like that, she said quietly. Daniel looked up. Then how were you going to tell me? Or were you ever? Her shoulders tensed, but she didn't turn. I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure you'd still look at me the way you do. He said nothing. I'm Elena Kovric, she continued. My family owns Kovar International. Holdings in tech defense aerospace. My face has been on magazine covers I never asked for. I was supposed to marry a man chosen for me by the board of directors. Daniel's jaw tightened. And you ran. She nodded. 2 nights before the wedding. I walked out the back of the estate, ditched the GPS, the security. I kept running until my car died. I was barefoot by the time I found your road. She turned to face him, then eyes searching his. I didn't plan on any of this. I just wanted to feel small again, invisible, not property. Daniel rose slowly. You lied. I never gave you a name. You let me believe you were a nobody. She flinched. I wanted to be, just for a while, to breathe like a normal person. He stepped closer, hurt sharpening his voice. You let my daughter braid your hair. You let her trust you. And you, his voice cracked, you let me fall for someone who wasn't real. But I am real, Elena whispered. The woman who cleaned dishes beside you, who laughed at your dad jokes, who cried when Lily sang off-key, I didn't fake any of that. Daniel's chest rose and fell, a storm of emotions behind his eyes. I don't care about the crown, Daniel. I care about you, about Lily, this town, the quiet, the honesty, you. That's why I stayed. Not because I was hiding, because I was healing. Silence. Then Daniel said low and even. So what now? You go back to the palace, Elena stepped forward. Not if you ask me to stay. His eyes met hers, torn, bruised, but not closed. The fire crackled softly in the corner of the small living room. Daniel sat across from her, his arms folded, his eyes steady but cautious. Elena held a chipped mug of tea in her hands, steam curling upward like smoke from a wound. I was 7 when I first understood I didn't own my future, she began, voice barely above a whisper. Daniel said nothing. My father handed me a guest list at a fundraiser and told me which men I was allowed to speak to. I wore dresses chosen for optics. I was tutored not in literature or art, but in negotiation and silence. She looked up at him. By 16, I had security detail, even in school bathrooms. By 23, I was headlining charities I didn't believe in, smiling beside people I didn't trust. And by 28, I was told who I'd marry. She stared into her tea. He was powerful, strategic, respected, and cold. My family said it was a perfect match. Daniel's jaw tightened. They gave me a dress I didn't pick, in a castle I didn't choose, for a future I didn't want. I ran the moment I saw myself in the mirror. I didn't see a bride, I saw a prisoner. She looked at him, then raw and stripped down. And then I met you, and Lily, and your burnt grilled cheese sandwiches. And I remembered who I used to be. Daniel leaned forward. Why tell me now? Because hiding was cowardly, she said. But loving you, that made me brave. Daniel stood alone in the diner after she left for the night. The chairs were stacked, the lights dimmed, and the scent of coffee still clung to the air. But none of it felt familiar anymore. It felt off. He wiped down the counter more than it needed. His hand moved out of habit, but his mind spun. She lied. Not once, but every day she stood across from him, smiling like she was just Anna. Not Elena Kovric, the billionaire heiress every news channel had been buzzing about. He had let her into his home, into Lily's life, into the fragile routine he'd built after everything else had fallen apart. And yet, she bandaged his hand without flinching. She sang off-key lullabies with Lily. She helped him fix a broken shelf and danced with her socks on the diner tiles when the jukebox glitched. Was that all fake? He leaned against the counter, hands braced on the surface. His breath was heavy. His trust had been burned before by promises, by people who said they'd stay. Elena said she cared, said she was tired of being owned. But Daniel had spent years learning how to survive without needing anyone. Now needing her terrified him. What if she disappeared again? What if she didn't? He looked toward the door, the same one she had walked through 100 times before, with bandaged arms, with a soft smile, with secrets she didn't yet know how to tell. Daniel closed his eyes. What do I do with this? He whispered to the silence. And the silence, like always, gave no answer. The gravel crunched under Elena's heels as she walked up the farmhouse path. The sky was bruised with the colors of early dusk. Her heart pounded not from fear this time, but from the possibility of losing something she'd never known she needed. Daniel stood on the porch, Max just inside watching through the screen. I told you everything, she said quietly. I didn't expect forgiveness, but I had to be honest. Daniel didn't speak. I know I lied, her voice cracked. But those nights at the table, fixing the gate, watching Max fall asleep by the fireplace, those were the first real moments of my life. He looked at her then. I've been everything CEO's daughter media. Darling walking headline. But with you, with Max, I was just a person. A woman who laughed too hard, who messed up pancakes, who finally felt something again. She stepped closer, her eyes glassy. You taught me that safety doesn't come from guards or gates. It comes from trust, from being seen and still welcomed. I don't want the life I ran from, she whispered. I want the one we built without meaning to. I want the sound of Max's laugh, the way you leave the porch light on. Silence stretched. Elena pressed a hand to her heart. Please let me come back, not as who I was, but as who I've become. Daniel watched her, the layers of mistrust and pain flickering behind his eyes. He hadn't said yes, but he hadn't walked away either, and in that breath between past and future hope flickered. The black SUV waited at the edge of the gravel drive, its engine purring like a quiet warning. The guards stood respectfully, their suits crisp, their eyes lowered, but they might as well have been walls. Elena turned to Daniel, her face calm but pale. They said I have to go just for now. There's fallout I need to face. Daniel stood stiff, arms crossed. He didn't know what to say. 1,000 words stormed behind his eyes, but none made it past his lips. Max wasn't as silent. No, the boy shouted, running up to her. He grabbed her hand, clutching it with both of his tiny ones. Don't go. You said you were staying. You said. Elena dropped to her knees and wrapped him tight. Her voice broke. I know, sweetheart. I didn't want to go. Tears ran freely down Max's cheeks. It'll be good. I'll wait here. You can come back, right? You will, right? Daniel's jaw clenched. Seeing Max like this broke something in him. Elena nodded, pulling back just enough to kiss Max's forehead. You are the bravest boy I've ever met, and I will come back. That's a promise. She looked up at Daniel. Their eyes locked, years of fear, trust, anger, and something deeper passing between them. If you still want me, she whispered. Then she stood. The guard opened the door. Elena hesitated, her fingers brushing the edge of her coat as if she might turn back. But she didn't. The door shut. The SUV pulled away, and Daniel stood frozen on the porch. Max's hand wrapped in his, both of them staring into the dust cloud left behind. The light in the house flickered on as night fell, but inside it felt dimmer than ever. The bell above the diner door jingled more often now. Word had spread about the little place with the best grilled cheese in 3 counties and a quiet man who never rushed your coffee. Daniel moved through it all like a ghost, polite, efficient calm. He flipped pancakes, poured refills, nodded at regulars. But something in him had dimmed. The stool where Elena used to sit, third from the end, always half-turned so she could see the door, remained empty no matter how packed the counter got. Max noticed too. He never said her name, but he looked at that stool every morning before school, like checking to see if maybe, just maybe, her scarf still hung in the coat room, forgotten or left on purpose. Daniel had touched it once, then walked away. He hadn't told anyone what she really was, not even Sheriff Keller, who'd noticed her photo in a news article and raised an eyebrow. Daniel simply said, "She's gone," and kept wiping the counter. The diner's walls held the echoes of her laughter. Max's eyes held the question. Did she mean it? Will she come back? And Daniel, night after night, sat on the porch after closing, staring at the road, waiting. The envelope came in the morning mail, tucked between grocery flyers and a utility bill. No return address, just Daniel's name written in flowing handwriting he recognized instantly. He stared at it for a long time, heart hammering like it had the day she left. He opened it slowly, carefully. Inside was a single sheet of cream-colored stationery, an airline ticket tucked into the fold, and a small silver key taped to the bottom corner. The key shimmered like something out of another life. The letter read, "Daniel, if you're reading this, I've finally found the courage to stop running. I've spent my life surrounded by marble floors and private jets, but nothing has ever felt more real than your kitchen and Mac's laughter. I don't know how to live in two worlds, but I want to try if you'll let me. The key is to the place I told you about. It's quiet, near the coast. The ticket is open-ended because I didn't know when you'd be ready, or if. But I meant every word I said to Max, and to you. I miss grilled cheese at midnight and the way you always check the locks twice. If there's a place for me in your world, just one seat at your table, it'll wait forever. Love, Elena." Daniel sat down hard in the kitchen chair, the letter trembling in his hands. Max came bounding in, hair still wild from sleep. "Anything good in the mail?" Daniel looked up, smiled faintly, and held up the key. "Maybe." Max sat cross-legged on the kitchen floor, clutching the silver key like it was a treasure from a storybook. "She sent this for us," he said, eyes shining. "That means she wants us to come." Daniel stood by the sink, arms crossed, brow furrowed. He hadn't touched the plane ticket since opening the letter. It sat on the counter like a dare. "It's not that simple, Max," he said softly. "Her world is not like ours, but she wants us in it," Max shot back. "She picked us." Daniel looked at his son, really looked. In Max's face was hope, the kind that had been rare since Max's mother passed. The kind that was fragile and stubborn all at once. "I just don't know what we'd be stepping into," Daniel said. "It's not like driving down to the lake. It's her life. Billionaire meetings and security guards and cameras. We don't belong in that." Max stood up and walked over. He held the key up between them, hands small but steady. "She came to us when she didn't know who she was. She helped with the dishes. She sat with me when I was sick. You made her laugh. You don't think that was real?" Daniel didn't answer. Max's voice dropped to a whisper. "You always tell me to be brave. This is your turn." That landed like a stone in Daniel's chest. He looked at the key again, at his son, at the worn kitchen that had once felt like the whole world. And suddenly it felt smaller than ever. The car that picked them up from the airport was sleek black and far too polished for Daniel's worn jacket and Max's backpack with a missing zipper. But the driver smiled like they were royalty, addressed them both by name, and handed Max a cold orange juice before they'd even pulled away from the curb. Max pressed his face to the tinted window as the city rolled past, grand buildings, marble statues, and gates taller than their house back home. When they turned into the estate, Daniel felt his breath catch. The gates alone were made of wrought iron, twisted into the shapes of wildflowers. The driveway stretched long and winding, lined with old trees that whispered in the breeze. And then the palace came into view, not a castle like in fairy tales, though Max whispered, "Whoa, it is a castle, but a sprawling estate of glass and stone, elegant and silent." Security stood in tailored suits at the entrance, but they didn't ask questions or raise eyebrows. Instead, they bowed to Daniel, bowed to Max. A woman in a navy blue dress, Elena's personal assistant, Daniel guessed, came down the steps with a soft smile. "Mr. Cole, Master Max, we've been expecting you." Daniel felt himself tense, but Max just grinned. "Do you have cookies?" The woman laughed. "Chef baked them fresh. Chocolate chip, I believe. Daniel's boots clicked against polished floors that had likely seen kings and CEOs, and for a moment he wanted to turn around. But Max held his hand tightly, as if saying, "You're the brave one now." They were led to a guest suite overlooking a private garden. There were fresh flowers in the vase, a note on the nightstand, and Elena waiting just down the hall, but not like royalty. She wasn't in a gown, she wasn't in heels. She was in jeans and bare feet, hair tied back, standing there like someone waiting for family to come home. "Hi," she whispered, and Daniel smiled, tired eyes softening. "Hi." Daniel hadn't seen her like this before. Elena stood at the far end of the marble corridor, the afternoon light casting soft gold across the high windows. She wore a deep emerald gown that shimmered like the sea, the kind of dress made for cameras and crowns. Her hair was swept back with precision, the necklace at her throat glinting subtly with each breath. Two guards stood near the door, but it wasn't them that made Daniel pause. It was her eyes. Because behind all that royal polish, behind the elegant posture and poised hands, she looked scared. Not the kind of fear you show when you're in danger, but the kind you feel when you're about to lose something you can't replace. Daniel approached slowly, Max trailing a few steps behind, wide-eyed and tugging at his clean jacket collar. Elena gave him a quick smile, then looked back at Daniel, like she couldn't quite believe he was real. "I thought you might not come," she said softly, the confidence in her voice brittle. "I almost didn't," Daniel admitted. She exhaled almost a laugh. "You look the same." "You don't," he said, and then added quickly, "I mean that in the best way." She smiled again, really smiled this time, but her hands fidgeted at her sides, fingers brushing invisible lint from the gown. "I'm still me, Daniel," she said. "This outfit, the crown, the people who stand when I enter, it's part of the role, but it's not all of who I am." Daniel's gaze was steady. "And who are you right now?" She looked down, then back up. "Someone hoping you'll see me, really see me." There was silence, and then Max broke it in the way only a child can be, walking straight up to Elena and tugging gently at her hand. "You look like a queen in a storybook," he said with complete sincerity. "But you smell like cookies." She burst out laughing, a sound that echoed through the polished hall like music. Daniel chuckled too, shoulders finally relaxing. And in that moment, among chandeliers and gowns and history, what mattered most wasn't power or money or title. It was connection. It was honesty. It was the simple truth that no amount of royalty could replace the comfort of being seen and loved for who you really are. The palace was quieter at night. The staff had retreated, the long halls dimmed with soft sconces. Music from the dining room had faded hours ago, and even Max had finally fallen asleep beneath covers too fancy for a small-town boy who still whispered about fireflies and tree forts. Daniel found her on the balcony where the moon stretched over the gardens like a soft blanket. The stone railing was cool beneath his hands as he stepped beside her. Elena didn't turn at first. She just stared out into the dark, lights of the city glowing faintly in the distance. She wore something simpler now. Not a gown, not silk, just a soft sweater and slacks, her hair pulled into a loose braid. "I used to come out here as a girl," she said softly, "whenever the world got too loud." Daniel stayed quiet. She turned slightly, just enough to look at him out of the corner of her eye. "Do you still see me as her?" "As Anna," he didn't answer right away. The wind tugged gently at her braid, and she looked down as if bracing for something painful. "I see you," he said finally. Her eyes flicked to his. "I see the woman who showed up with a torn dress and didn't care about her title. The one who helped Max draw comic book heroes and tried not to cry when her ribs hurt from laughing too hard." She smiled faintly. "But that wasn't really me. That was you," he said firmly. "It's still you. The name was different. The walls were gone. But the heart underneath, that never changed." She looked away again, blinking. "I liked being Anna," she whispered. "I liked her too," he said. "But I'm falling for the woman who's brave enough to be both." The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was full, with meaning. with history, with a kind of hope neither dared name yet. Then she asked quietly, would you ever be able to live in this world? Daniel looked out over the manicured lawns and marble fountains and knew what she meant. I don't know, he said honestly, but I'd walk beside you through it, as long as I didn't have to stop being me. She turned to face him fully now. I don't want you to, she said. Not ever. The palace gardens were warm with morning sun dew still clinging to the trimmed hedges. Daniel walked slowly beside Max along the cobbled path, the boy skipping every few steps, his energy in contrast with his father's quiet. They had spent the night in a guest wing that felt more like a museum than a home. Max had been fascinated, asking questions about every painting, every hallway, every button on the gold-threaded pillows. But this morning, Daniel noticed something different. Max was quieter now, thoughtful. Dad? Max asked, tugging at his hand. Yeah, buddy. Max bit his lip. Are we going home today? Daniel nodded slowly. I think so. Elena has a lot to take care of here. Max kicked a pebble. She said goodbye last night, but she didn't look happy. Daniel smiled faintly. No, she didn't. They walked in silence a moment longer until Max stopped completely and turned to face his father. Can I ask something? He said, serious now. Of course, Max hesitated. Can she be my mom now? Daniel blinked. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic, but it stopped the world. Daniel knelt, placing both hands on Max's small shoulders. Why do you ask that? Max looked down, then back up. She makes the world feel warm, like Mom used to. She listens. She laughs at my bad drawings. She doesn't pretend. Daniel's chest tightened. He hadn't planned for this, hadn't known how deeply Elena had already rooted herself in their lives. In their hearts, she might be leaving Max. I know, Max whispered. But maybe if she knows we want her, she won't. Daniel couldn't speak right away. He just pulled Max into a hug and held him there, his throat thick with everything he couldn't say. That was the moment he knew. He wasn't just holding on to a boy asking for love. He was holding the answer to the question he'd been too afraid to ask himself. Was there room in their life for something more? Yes. And if Elena felt the same, if she dared, then just maybe they weren't going home alone. The diner wasn't fancy. It never had been. The linoleum tiles were faded. The booths creaked when you sat down. The coffee was strong and the eggs always slightly overdone. But for Daniel, it had always been home. A quiet kind of home. That's why he brought her here. Elena looked almost out of place and yet not. She wore a simple sweater and jeans. No entourage, no designer labels, just a quiet smile and her hair pulled back like the first night they met. She slid into the booth across from him, brushing her fingers along the edge of the table. You know, this is the first place you saw me. Daniel nodded. Right out there, you were barefoot, confused, dust on your face, and you offered me coffee and no questions. He smiled. I still make terrible coffee. She laughed softly, but then the moment shifted, became something quieter, something real. Daniel reached into his jacket and set something on the table. It wasn't a ring box. It was a metal token, dull brass, worn smooth from years of use, etched with fading words, free slice of pie, Joe's Diner. Elena blinked. He cleared his throat. There's this thing the old owner used to do. You helped out? You got one of these. He called it thank you currency, said pie made everything better. He looked at her. I've been carrying this around since Max was born. It's the only thing I kept when I sold the truck. She picked up the token. It was warm from his hand, light, small, insignificant to anyone else, but not to her. I'm not asking for palaces, Elena, he said quietly. I'm not offering anything gold, just this life, this table, Max, me, coffee that's too strong, and laughter that comes slower but lasts longer. She swallowed. Her eyes shimmered. Will you have pie with me? He asked. For the rest of our lives, she didn't speak. She simply stood, walked around the booth, and slid in beside him. Her arms wrapped around his shoulders, her head tucked beneath his chin. Yes, she whispered. Yes, 1,000 times. The bell above the diner door jingled. Somewhere a waitress refilled a cup. The world kept turning. But at that table in that old booth with a pie token between them, time stood still. And for Daniel, the single dad who once thought he'd lost everything, it was the start of something richer than any crown. The sun filtered through the lace curtains of the small cottage on the edge of town. It wasn't grand, but it had a garden out back, a wooden porch swing that creaked in the evening, and a kitchen where laughter echoed more than footsteps. It was home. Daniel stirred the pancake batter while Max chased a dog around the table, one they'd rescued together. Elena leaned against the doorway, a coffee mug in hand, her silk blouse swapped for a worn flannel shirt. A quiet life stitched together from ordinary days. She hadn't returned to the palace in full. Not really. The press had called it unconventional. The board had tried to persuade her otherwise. But she made it clear she would remain Elena Kovric chairwoman, but not a figurehead. Not a ghost in heels behind glass towers. Instead, she'd split her time. Boardrooms and briefings in the city 3 days a week. Weekends and the rest in this town, in this house where her heart actually lived. I used to think power meant distance, she once told Daniel. Now I know it means choosing what you protect. She still wore the heirloom necklace, but often it sat beside Max's crayon drawings on the fridge. Her emails buzzed on silent while she helped with homework. She negotiated billion-dollar contracts and then spent the evening teaching Max how to make grilled cheese without burning it. And no one looked at her the way Daniel did. Not the investors, not the paparazzi, just him with quiet awe and gentle steadiness. That morning, she stepped on over the dog, kissed Daniel's cheek, and took the spatula from his hand. My turn. He smiled and let her take over, leaning back with his coffee. Max looked up from under the table. Can I help? She nodded. Of course. You're the head of strawberry distribution. Max beamed like he'd just been promoted to king of the world. Daniel watched them and felt something settle in him, a kind of peace he hadn't known he'd been waiting for. This wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was better. It was a real one. One made not of diamonds and headlines, but of muddy shoes at the door, Tuesday night dinners, shared blankets on the couch, and a woman who could have ruled the world choosing instead to love two people who simply needed her. Not because of what she had, but because of who she'd become. The diner hadn't changed, same chip mugs, same quiet charm, but Elena's life had. Guards now held the door, yet inside it was still pancakes and crayons. Elena sat beside Daniel and Max, setting her phone aside to soak in the moment. Max handed her a heart-shaped pancake and called her Mommy Elena, a name that still made her eyes soften. Around them, life buzzed quietly. No headlines, no cameras, just love served with syrup and smiles. Elena, once an heiress running from it all, had found her home in a small booth where being known mattered more than being famous.